Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential. And this is for the people of Gaza. It could be a hope, it could be a destination, have a lot of industry.
NATO is a platform for the United States to project power on the world stage.
When it comes to America, it's the president that decides.
For sure.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine.
If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin.
There is some fairly high tension with the U.S. at this point.
Yes,
For sure.
we have always been good allies. It's about freedom of the free world where international law applies, where might does not make right. We are so grateful for America. I don't want to let this go.
I'll never let go. I promise.
We're dependent on the United States. Being a happy vassal is one thing, being a miserable slave is something else.
For sure.
The special relationship is in operation right now.
I think it's unwise for politicians to sit in television studios and pronounce which acts may or may not be in accordance with international law.
Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
Yes.
The world is once again witnessing the brave people of Iran stand up. Their cry for the choice to live and be governed as they choose.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he must be involved in the appointment of Iran's next leader.
There is no prison, no threat, and no tear gas canister that can hold back the inherent yearning for liberty.
The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost and we may have casualties.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
The hour of your freedom is at hand.
Help has arrived.
Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination?
What is now happening is a denial of international law, a denial of international order. And it's not new.
History is repeating itself.
There's no example in history where you've bombed people to democracy.
The refugee crisis is a symptom of wars. Wars are a symptom of economy, and economy is driven by a thirst for more accumulation of capital.
Inequality is at the heart of all of the problems. Corporations that are destroying our environment, destroying our democracy, and destroying our communities.
Rich people really piss me off a little bit. The rich accumulate more and more wealth. It doesn't trickle down to anybody, it trickles up.
Their system is violent and murderous. In order to challenge systems, you have to try and build power.
What happens when you don't organize for power is that somebody else is organizing for you. It's not enough to demonstrate.
It's really up to us to actually begin to kind of build the society that we want from the ground up.
Either we move beyond capitalism or we die.
Good evening everybody, and welcome to Resistance is Existence, the fight for our future. Thank you for being here with us tonight at Roxy. We're about to begin, so wherever you're sitting, I hope you're settled in and ready for what's ahead. To open the evening, please join me in welcoming comedian, writer, activist, and member of the M25's coordinating collective, Francesca Martinez.
Hello! Wow! Roxy! Hello! Welcome to Resistance is Existence! Are you excited? It's so lovely to be here. I have your wobbly warm-up, and I'm going to talk about what resistance means to me. So I am a proud wobbly woman, and I was born wobbly, right? And when I was about 2, my parents took me to a big doctor, and he assessed me, and he told them that I was physically and mentally retarded. This proved not to be true because I have never voted for Trump, to say. Thank you. But seriously, guys, he also said something else bizarre, right? He said that I would never lead a normal life. And I was like, who wants a normal life? want a fucking amazing life. Because there is such a deep assumption in society, isn't there, that if a person differs from the so-called norm, they are going to suffer more. Now, there's a word for this, and I learned it recently, and that one is bollocks. No, it is good, because any suffering I've had has not been because I've been wobbly, it's been because I've lived in a world that can't handle difference. That's what we need to eradicate, right? Not difference. And have you noticed, right, how they choose really ugly names for conditions like schizophrenia, spina bifida, and not just one sclerosis, multiple sclerosis. Anyway, I just think in contrast, right, they choose really nice names for truly awful things, like a friendly fire. Oh, friendly fire! Doesn't that sound like a bit of thrash? Don't worry, love, you do got a bit of friendly fire. Put some yogurt on there. And, oh, how lovely is ethnic cleansing? Oh, doesn't it sound like a mug of herbal tea? Would you like a nice warm cup of ethnic cleansing before bed? With some oat milk and a sprinkle of genocide? I mean, it's really bizarre. Anyway, I digress. More on labels later. Back to my story, yeah. So my parents, they left that meeting with the doctor, despite being very young. They managed to reject his negative framing, and they decided to love me as their daughter. That was their act of resistance, right? And as a result, I was a very happy kid. I was very confident. I loved life. I was like, oh my God, I was so naughty. Get this, yeah. When I was about 6, I had to be tested for a mobility benefit. So this is basically when a person comes around your house, watches you walk, and decides if it's shit enough to give you money. That's about it, yeah? So just before the test, I got nervous, and my mum said to me, now, Chesky, don't worry. You don't have to walk. You're very best today. Go, Mum. So I did the test. I walked my wobbly walk, and just as the woman was about to leave, my mum said, I said to the woman, my mum told me that I didn't have to walk my very best for you today. And my poor mum went bright red. And then she said, oh, she's mentally retarded too. So I grew up in a very warm and positive environment, yeah. And life was an adventure. I knew I was wobbly, but that was normal. But then everything changed when I hit the age of 11. Because there was a lot of pressure on me to go to a special school. And I don't mean Eton. Oh no. So my parents didn't want this. They didn't want me being defined by what I couldn't do. So they fought very hard. And they got me into a mainstream all-girls school. Yeah. I don't know if you know much about all-girls schools, but when you put teenage girls together, they become bitches. Oh my God, they hated me, guys. And I found it so hard, you know. And also, I have always loved boys. Like, I think boys are amazing. Seriously, if you are a boy, well done, really. So I found school really tough. Because what happened was, within a few months, I lost all my confidence. Because I realised it was a massive shock. Oh my God, Francesca, you live in a world that views you as abnormal, as faulty, as broken, as damaged. And that was such a disempowering realisation. And unfortunately, I adopted it, and so I lost all my confidence, and I began to hate myself. So school became a nightmare, and I had no friends at all. Although all the girls want to be my friend now on Facebook, yeah, fuck off. Sorry. Calm down. Did I say that out loud? I'm not bitter, really. So where was I? Yeah. So basically, guys, I hated school, and I don't know what would have happened to me had two things not come along and changed my life forever. So the first was, I went to my careers advisor at school when I was 13. I said to her, I really want to be an actress. And she said, maybe you should think about computers. Yeah, but then a year later, I got a part on Grange Hill. And I was like, you know where you can shove your computer. Grange Hill's amazing. I was the first wobbly schoolgirl. And the best thing about it was this. I got to miss school 9 months of the year legally. So I'm very happy but stupid. That it's more important, right? So Grange Hill was amazing, and there were boys there, and I made friends again, and it was so much fun. They used to film Top of the Pops in the same building. And one day I came out of my dressing room, and the great David Bowie was standing right there. Now, we were always told to act really normal around the celebs. So I just said to him, all right, Dave? Yeah. Yeah. And he said, oh my God, it's Rachel from Grange Hill! I said, calm down, Dave. We're all human. Okay, but he did that. But the point is, it was a great experience. And some of my confidence started to come back. So I did that show for 5 whole years. And I guess if I'm honest, I still wished I was normal every day. And here's what totally changed my life. Okay, so I was about 20, and I was in a pub. And I met a guy called Dylan. And I don't know how this came up, right? But I said to him, I'm brain damaged, as you do. And he said, what? I said, I'm brain damaged. He said, what? I said, are you deaf? I'm brain damaged. He said, no, you're not. That's just a label other human beings have made up to define you. But you are perfectly you. And I said, I fucking love you. Anyway, he turned out to be an asshole. Yeah, that's not the point, you guys. Yeah, listen carefully, because the point is very profound. And that is, even an asshole can change your life. And he was my asshole. And he really did change my life, guys, because for the first time in so many years, I didn't feel wrong or faulty or abnormal. I just felt like me, Francesca. And it was so liberating to realize that I had the power to choose how to view myself. And when I took that back, everything changed. I ripped up society's ugly labels and I made up my own. And he also he taught me something else equally profound, right? And that was that my battles to like myself had nothing to do with being wobbly and everything to do with living in a world that breeds self-loathing. Because let's face it, no one likes themselves. It's so sad. I do a lot of talk in schools, right? And I always say to the kids, put your hand up if you like yourself. And no one ever does. And I'm like, guys, you're 16. You're at the prime of your life. It ain't getting better than this. Don't you think, guys, it is so sad how we have created a culture where our young people can't enjoy their youth, their beauty, their health, because they're too busy trying to live up to toxic ideals. You could ask yourself, why? Why is this? And I think the answer is very simple, and that is consumerism. Because for that to work, most of us have got to believe we're not good enough as we are, so we'll go out and buy shit we don't need. You know, that's it, guys. Don't fall for it. That's why I always say accepting yourself as you are is an act of civil disobedience. Try it. I guess my point is to you that human diversity is beautiful, and I wish that politicians would stop demonising those who need extra help. Like, now I have to be reassessed for my benefit every few years, just in case I'm de-wobbled. Seriously, they waste your money paying people to come around my house to say, Francesca, are you still wobbly? I should just say, how about I give you a wet shave and we'll find out? Seriously, guys, I just finally on the end of talking about my hero. And my hero is my Spanish grandfather, Yayo. Now, Yayo fought in the Spanish Civil War when he was just 17 against Franco. Then he was captured and he endured 7 years in rehabilitation camps. Miraculously, he survived, and he had this dream, and his dream was to be a writer. And despite all the odds, he managed to publish his first anti-Franco novel in Mexico a few years later. But he became fearful for his young family's life, so he sought political asylum here in London. And that's where he spent the rest of his life, in his beloved Kent Rise. Now, he taught me as a child about the horrors of fascism and the dangers of dehumanizing people. And I think that's why I hate labels, because they reduce fully complex human beings to lazy stereotypes. And I always remember a story he told me. He said that during the war, he never could shoot the enemy, and he always missed on purpose. And that was because the enemy wasn't Franco. It turned out the enemy was a young boy who was terrified, just like him. So I am literally alive today because of his acts of resistance. And I think he'd be so delighted that we have gathered here to join together. Now, before I go, I just want to say, I think that we need a wobbly revolution. What do I mean by that? Well, my revolution has 2 aims, right? 1, never let anyone make you feel bad about your body. Resist the pressure to hate yourself. Because no matter how they look, or how they work, or how wobbly they are miracles, because they give you and me the gift of life. So make sure you resist that and you love your body. And also, it's really important to remember that every human right we enjoy today was won by people who focus outwards, not inwards. So liking yourself really is a political act. And number 2, I think that we need to resist the tactics of divide and rule. Because that's what the powerful want. They want us all fighting together. They want us disagreeing. And I think it's really important that we talk to those who disagree with us. We don't belittle them, humiliate them, and berate them. we need to try and connect with them and focus on our common goals. And I believe that is the only way to build a mass movement for a more humane, kinder world. So guys, you have got an incredible evening ahead of you with some of the people who are at the forefront of this fight for a better world for all of us. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce a man whose courage and principles and integrity inspire me and millions every day. This man is a true shining light in the darkness, and I am honoured to call him my friend. Please give a warm London welcome to Mr. Yanis Varoufakis.
Good evening, Troxy. Good evening, London. Good evening, Britain. Good evening to all those who are watching beyond these shores. And solidarity to the people of Palestine, Iran, and Cuba who cannot watch. The people of Palestine, Iran, and Cuba who cannot watch because they're under siege by the mafias that are ruling over us. We are here tonight under this great slogan, this banner. Resistance is existence. Why? Because yet again, we are at a crossroads. Yet again, capitalism shot itself in the foot, undermined itself, and as it always done when it is in trouble, it is trying to survive by resorting to fascism at home and to war abroad. Yet again, the liberal establishment, wittingly or unwittingly, are doing whatever they can to propel the ultra-right to power. Like the Bourbons. Remember the Bourbons? They forgot nothing and they learned nothing. This is why we're here to resist. To make hope normal again for the many, not the few. Folks. Yeah, well, I put the two slogans together, okay? It's about time, don't you think? Look, the writing has been on the wall for at least a decade now. In 2015, European capitalism's greatest crisis since 1929 spawned an eco-socialist wave. A wave that propelled people like me to Greece's finance ministry. Soon after that, it propelled Jeremy Corbyn, who will be with us later, to the leadership of the Labour Party. The powers that be couldn't have that. They couldn't let that be. They crushed our peoples. They crushed our governments. They crushed our political parties. That's why, on the 9th of February of 2016, some of us, you call us utopians, call us whatever you might, we gathered at the Volksbühne Theater in Berlin, a theater built by workers for workers, to found DiEM25, the Democracy in Europe movement. The one simple message we had at the Volksbühne Theater 10 years ago was that Europe will either democratize by 2025 or it will disintegrate. Well, Europe refused to democratize, so it is disintegrating into a cesspit of warmongering, of what masquerades as military Keynesianism, with loads of huge doses of ecocide, authoritarianism, imperialism, xenophobia thrown in for good measure. So, what do we do? Why are we here tonight? Why have we organized this? Well, let me answer by means of a story, harking back to that event 10 years ago at the Volksbühne. Immediately after the event, which was a great success, we had tens of thousands of people across Europe joining DiEM25 that very evening of our Volksbühne event. So you can imagine my co-conspirator in that, I meant colleague, Srećko Horvat, a mad Croat philosopher who was meant to be here tonight, but he can't because his father is very ill. He sends his apologies. Anyway, Srećko and I were elated. The event went really very well. So we were on our way to the bar, and we bumped into a much older than us at the time, German comrade, an activist who had been involved in lots of great campaigns. He had experienced one defeat after the other. So when I saw him, Srećko was next to me, I asked him, so what do you think of what we achieved tonight? And he looked at me gloomily and he said, there is no doubt you will fail. Srećko got a bit peeved. And he said to him, so what the hell are you doing here? Karl-Heinz looked at us serenely, very thoughtfully, and said something I will never forget. He said, because I wanted to be with the people who will have to pick up the pieces when the system comes crashing down. So that's what we're here to do tonight, to start picking up the pieces, because the system is crashing down all over us. To be together, to resist. To be together, to face up to our species' greatest threat. And what is our species' greatest threat? It is the way in which wealth is persuading poverty to keep wealth in power, so that wealth prevents humanity from acquiescing in its own survival. That is the task. Now, it will take a lot of good people. It will take a lot of great organizations and organization. It will take many political parties within our country and without our country, outside our country, across our lands, to accomplish that. To accomplish the resistance which is necessary for existence. We are beginning here today. I want to thank you all for coming, so that together we can shake London, we can shake Britain, we can shake Europe, we can shake the world. To continue that which we started doing in a small way 10 years ago, gently, compassionately, but firmly. Thank you so much. And now I want to introduce you to a young man. His name is Erik Edman. He is the epitome of what Europeanism promised to be. Erik, come out. There he is. He is half Swedish. He's half Swedish. He's half Greek. He lives in Brussels. He's the epitome of what should be progressive Europeanism. And he's the political director of DiEM25. So I leave you in his capable hands. He will be moderating the next panel. Thank you so much.
Oh, actually, Yanis, no. What are you doing for the next 40 minutes? You busy?
I don't think I'm doing anything, no?
Well, you know how I made Srećko isn't going to be in this panel, right?
Okay.
You want to?
All right.
There we go. Good. Awesome.
But
all right. Our guest star, make yourself comfortable. Thanks, mate. Hi, everyone. My name's Erik, and I'm going to have, well, we all are going to have the dubious pleasure, as part of the first panel of the evening, to have to revisit the last 10 years, horrible as they've been, and to try and extract from these years some kind of series of lessons for the resistance, if there are any lessons, because the last 10 years have been many things, but the golden age of the left, they have not. So, that means that our exploration needs to start in Europe 2016, a strange land whose privileged citizens still believed that their world was run by these quaint concepts like human rights, international law, democracy, freedom of speech. You get the idea, childish things like that. And from there, we've had a series of scandals, wars, pandemics, environmental crises, all happening at such breakneck speeds that we've barely had enough time to understand them, let alone reflect on what we could possibly do about any of them. And that lands us in 2026. Okay, I'm not going to paint a picture of 2026. Yanis did, our video did, and I suspect the vast majority of you watch the news. That's why you're here on a Tuesday evening rather than at home. So let's get the show on the road. Please join me in welcoming our panelists who will be exploring together with Yanis these questions. First off, we've got organizer, campaigner, former Labour MP, co-director of Declassified UK and founder of RISE, Laura Pidcock.
Thanks, Yanis. Thanks, Eric.
Next up, we've got activist, artist, and music producer extraordinaire, Brian Eno. Woo! Hi, Laura. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right, let's do this. We're ready to delve into our trauma from the last 10 years? I'm going to start with you, Brian, because you were referenced by Yanis in his opening.
Actually, I didn't.
No? You told me you would.
I was going to.
That's how much attention I've been paying.
I was going to say, and I missed this bit of my design talk, that Brian was at the Volksbühne Theater 10 years ago, and he wrapped up the proceedings. It was a 4-hour event, and he came out, and he gave a glorious speech that ended in a majestic line, that was his final line, and this is how the whole event wrapped up. And he said, "Start cooking, a recipe will follow."
And here we are, 10 years later. Personally, I feel like we need to order takeaway. But maybe you've got a different opinion. Maybe we have been coming up with a recipe along the way. How do you feel 10 years later?
Yeah, I feel that, yeah. I didn't say it anywhere near as dramatically as Yanis did. I wish I'd had you to speak for me on that occasion. But I think we have been doing that. I think we've learned a few things. One of them is that we're actually dealing with fascism. We've sort of got over that thing of, oh, it's just far-right politics, as though it's part of the same game we've all been playing and we should be tolerant of it and, join in. It isn't. We're dealing with fascism now, and fascism intends to end the game. It intends to smash the game of democracy. So that's qualitatively different, I think. So I think a lot of people have realized that. This is not politics as usual. And the second thing I think people have realized is that we aren't going to win on our own. We have to organize, we have to form communities. And the thing I've noticed most over the last 10 years is that community is the big word. And I always say to people when they say, well, I never know what to do to help, I haven't got much money, I haven't got much time, what to do to help. And I just think, find somebody who's doing something that you admire and help them. Whatever it is, in whichever way they can be helped, try to do something. Don't sit there worrying. Actually get into something. And that makes a huge difference psychologically. As soon as you're part of the action, that really makes you feel better.
This ties in quite well, I think, with what you've been doing, Laura, because up until, I think, was it 2017, you were a Labour MP, right? Yeah. And then you chose not to pursue that anymore. You haven't run again for election since then, right? And I was watching this incredible interview that you gave recently in Local Heroes, where you kind of spoke about kind of the disillusionment that came with that parliamentarian experience, let's say. You've gone to grassroots organizing, local organizing. Do you agree with what Brian's saying about that's really where the hope is, that's really where the action is?
Well, I think first of all, I'm not disillusioned. I think that there is this idea that if you are not just looking for a parliamentary seat, trying to organise in parliamentary elections that somehow you've given up. I think what the defeat, it was in 2019 that I was defeated, it was 2017 when I became a member of parliament, is that I started looking at the recipe for the defeat. I started looking at how in a community that was battered by Thatcher during the miners' strike, could they turn to the Conservatives? What was it? You know, it's not about any of those people, you know, being bad people and I was just great. No, there were serious lessons to be learned from that defeat. And for me, it was about broadening the conception of democracy. You know, we are so stunted sometimes in our imagination in relation to representative democracy, as if it's just, we get a good set of MPs, send them to Parliament, and that is the job done. And I'll give you an example of why I think that's flawed. I was the Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights. Say if I had become the Secretary of State for Employment Rights under Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn, and I had implemented even a tenth of what we wanted to implement. One thing was, you know, sector-wide sectoral collective bargaining. And we went first to the care sector. In fact, that was where we were going to start because it's mainly low-paid women being absolutely exploited for their labour. What a good place to start. Okay, so day one, you're signing some kind of order to say, right, now there's going to be national sectoral collective bargaining for that sector. How would have capital responded? We go for water, we go for chemicals industries, we go for the building sector. We start to organise and mandate that pay is collectively bargained. Were we in a position during the Corbyn era to defend that mandate and defend that political programme on the streets, in our communities, in the pubs, in the churches, in the mosques? Were we building a popular case inside our communities? And I think it was a no. You know, we were defeated. And of course, there's a big, rich story to tell about how the establishment defeated us, about how I was defeated, you know, in Northwest Durham. But I think we have to widen our conception of democracy. You know, we can't just have this idea that for working class people, we defer our power to a set of, you know, albeit very good people trying to do noble things. I think building power for ourselves in lots of different ways is important. The second really quick example of why I think it's flawed is because look what Capital did to Liz Truss. One of their own, you know. The markets, who are entirely unelected, got rid of that Prime Minister in 45 days. They did what our social movements have been trying to do for the last 15 years with 14 million people that they've kept in poverty. So my idea is not that I'm disillusioned, it's just that I want to widen our concept of what democracy is and what power is for working class people.
And where does... So where does parliamentary politics come into all of this? If really like the bedrock of democracy is on the ground, how does that translate to power in the halls of power, so-called? Because many people will say that local organizing can also be quite tribal, it can be quite insular, and you just let the rest of the world burn, and you just take care of the things in your neighborhood. How would you react to that?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I don't would like to forget that Parliament exists, but it does exist, and there are important things to be done in relation to Parliament, but it is one sphere of our political influence. What I mean by this is, you know, if we think about from Thatcher and beyond, the way, and I know people think that this might be, you know, this isn't a northern thing. Margaret Thatcher was a proponent of neoliberalism that smashed our communities. They smashed our sense of community. They sold off everything that we produced. You know, we don't own things. And I feel, and I'm sure people in the audience will feel this as well, that a sense of bitterness sets in. Now, to build ourselves kind of power out of that situation isn't just to go, okay, well, here's a group, I've said it before, of really brilliant people, and we'll defer our sense of hope to them. That's how we'll regain power. We have to look for every single opportunity where democracy could and did exist. You know, if we think about inside workplaces and the levels of collective coverage of trade unionism, if we think about some of the mining lodges, you know, they got things done in the communities. They were democratic spaces where those people debated, thrashed things out, argued with each other, and I'm told come to fisticuffs sometimes, especially during the dispute with the politics being so intense. So this isn't about, okay, let's forget Parliament, let's just think local. This is about saying, okay, let us expand our imagination for everywhere we can build power for ourselves. I mean, I don't know when we last felt powerful. When did we last think, do you know what, right? The housing, the schools that we're in, the water that we drink, all of the things that are dear to us, they're owned by somebody else. We can't control them, we can't intervene. Okay, we have to intervene, and we have to start to be able to take back control through our sense of self, community, and power. And yes, of course, if parliamentary politics becomes a focus, that is because it is rooted in a groundswell of working class radicalism.
Right. Thank you for that. By the way, I should point out that in the country we're from, it's actually considered rude not to interrupt the people that you're speaking with. So if I do
it
cut
means you don't care.
it means you're not listening. So, you know, keep
What
that
do
in
you mean
mind.
it's rude not to interrupt?
Greece,
Just
you know, that
practicing.
little rocky place.
You're getting into the spirit. Practice.
So if I ever jump in, you're not allowed to get mad at me, all right? Yanis, you're somebody who's also had the misfortune to have been elected in the last 10 years on a couple of occasions. You've had your dabblings with power here and there. How does what Laura has been saying measure up to your own experience?
Oh, it's perfectly in sync with my own experience. Especially the question, you know, when did we last feel powerful? Because, you know, I grew up in a fascist dictatorship. You know, we didn't have the right to vote. There was no constitution. All the supposed institutions of democracy had been suspended. We were put in a cast, essentially. And yet, people had more hope then than they have now, because we could see the problem. You switch on the television, there would be a news announcer who wore a military uniform. And you say, okay, all right, if we get rid of the army, and if we have democracy, everything's going to be better. Whereas now, in the West, it's exactly the opposite feeling. As of, you know, as of your question, you know, to me, that I've been in power. I was never in power. I was in office. Don't confuse office with power. You see, if you're a right-winger and you move into an office, then you have power because you have capital behind you. If you're a lefty and I moved into the Ministry of Finance in Greece and I had 14,000 employees. They were all against me, except the 2 or 3 people I brought in with me. And they were not against me as employees, they were against me because they belonged to a system that was predicated upon, you know, plundering the many on behalf of the few. And you know, I was there on behalf of the many, and I was completely imprisoned in my ministerial office. Yeah. And you know, that's why I felt so relieved when I resigned.
But where does that leave us? Because that means that the left is always doomed to come up against a brick wall.
Well, where it leaves us is that it's not enough it's important to win office. But you need that which Laura was saying, empowerment from below, and what Brian was saying, community building. But I'd like to ask Brian a question. May I? Just a brief one? That is, you know, sure. Because you have been involved in community building through hard art and various projects. Now, how does that merge with the crucial aspect of change, which is, you know, to gain office and bring it together with community power in order to defeat the very, very few, the tiny minority who control everything?
Have you ever heard that thing Douglas Rushkoff said, find the others? That's sort of my idea, that I thought years and years ago I was involved with various activist groups, and I was seeing these people over here who were doing really interesting things, and these over here who were doing almost exactly the same thing and didn't know about them. So I thought the first thing we should do is know about each other. You know, a movement really takes shape when it starts to notice itself. This all stems from something that happened to me in 1965. I think on June the 25th, 1965.
Very specific.
I was an art student, and my girlfriend and I had heard that there was something happening about beat poetry at the Royal Albert Hall. Now, poetry then was very much a political identity thing, you know. People who were into poetry sort of agreed with each other. So we thought, Albert Hall, God, that's a big place. We should go up. So we hitchhiked up to London to the Albert Hall. And it was absolutely jam-packed with people who looked a bit like us, sort of long hair and a bit scruffy and sleeping bags and things like that. There were 7,000 people there and about another 2,000 outside who couldn't get in. And suddenly I realized, my God, this is a movement. And that movement from that day on was called the Underground, not to be confused with the transport system. But suddenly there was a thing called the Underground. It was a sort of awareness of the sheer scale of it. And I think that's what happened a couple of weeks ago in Gorton and Denton, where suddenly a group of people who had thought that they were the minority suddenly realized that they actually could be the majority. So all of these people who kind of felt like they wanted to vote for the Greens but thought, I don't know, is it a wasted vote? The main thing is to stop reform, you know. And when they heard, because of that opinion poll, that there were actually a lot of other people who would like to vote Green as well, suddenly things changed. So perception is very, very important in movement building. A movement, it isn't really effective until it's aware of itself. And then it's suddenly very effective. So I've always been thinking that I wanted to make coalescence happen. You know, I want to bring people together. And my studio is where this happens, of course, because I don't have any room to work in there anymore. I work in two little side rooms, and the main space is where people meet now.
Well, can I say something? Because community building, solidarity, all of these things feel a bit out of fashion in the 21st century. It feels like we live through these times of hyper-individualization, right? It feels like the left and the things that the left stands for and the things that the left kind of depends on in order to be successful are things that go against the trend of the times, this kind of like retreat to smaller and smaller sort of units of individuals. Do you think that's the case? Is the left outdated? Are we like a fossil? Or is there still space? This is for anyone who'd like to pick it up.
Well, I think this is hit on a really important point, because in and of itself, food banks, you know, mutual aid, kind of resistance to evictions, whilst they are all very, very worthy, in and of themselves aren't going to kind of challenge en masse the British establishment. You know, I think the last time the British establishment were worried were when we thought Jeremy Corbyn could form a government. And then, of course, the whole operation of the state swung in to defeat that project. And so I think we have to think about building back power in ways which are about confidence, which are about political education, which are about establishing spaces for ourselves, and fundamentally, and I think this is so important now, and especially in relation to what you both said about legacies of fascism and really existing fascism as a threat, is that we have to be able to be in dialogue with one another. We have to be able to argue with one another, and we have to be able to formulate politics. And what I mean by that is moving beyond this reductive sloganeering, and this is not to like blame anyone or anything like that, you know. I think a culture has evolved where the right have been formulating arguments and telling stories about what the system does to you, and obviously it's reactionary and it's shameful because it blames and scapegoats people who are nothing to do with the causes of people's discontent. Like, you know, the people that protest outside the asylum hotels in Newcastle. Not one of those people inside that asylum accommodation has put the 600,000 people in poverty in the northeast. Not one of the people inside. Yeah. Not one of the people inside that accommodation causes young people in our region to not be able to eat, and mothers go now without food because of asylum seekers. It's a nonsense. But they've allowed space, and they've allowed themselves the opportunity to formulate political arguments that are resonating. And I don't think we can match that by saying, save the NHS, full stop. Now, of course, we all want to save the NHS in here. We want it free from private interest. You know, we want to make sure that it is an accessible system. Same with education. We want the education system to be free from private interest. But why? Do we take the time to explain it? Do we sit down and say, do you know what, even if you really disagree with me, let us have this argument and let us formulate a narrative and tell a story about what the capitalists, and particularly the neoliberal capitalists, have done to our homes and our communities and our sense of self. So I think it's not just, you know, I think we're going to need all of it. I think we're going to need to help each other because people are poor, people are cold in their homes, you know, uniforms are extortionate, all of the really simple things. And then you go to your tap water and you're paying 58 quid for your water. Water, a natural resource which is privatised. There is so much wrong, and it's going to take a jigsaw of things. But I think fundamentally, on the left, we have to realise, and I don't say this lightly, that our politics is not popular right now. And it's not popular because I think people sense like we're telling people off, that we're kind of moralistic, that we want to shame people and other people are stupid, and get back to having dialogue with our neighbours about what these neoliberal capitalists have done to our communities.
So can I...
Please, yes, shortly, and then I'll... Yanis.
Probably some of you know the writer Ece Temelkaran. I know Yanis does. She wrote a book about 10 years ago called How to Lose a Country, which is about really the history of fascism in Greece, in Turkey, in modern Turkey.
Often confused.
Yes, often confused. And one of the things she says, which I really, really like, she says, hope is for lightweights, because people keep talking about, you know, we're doing things to give people hope. She says, hope is for lightweights. What you need is faith. And her concept is that imagining a future and then acting as though it's going to happen is the way to create that future. And I really think that's quite precise, that analysis, because hope is speculative. It's sort of thinking that it might not happen, hoping that it will happen. Faith doesn't have to be religious faith, but just a real belief in a future that you can imagine. That changes the way you behave. Hope doesn't really change your behavior that much, whereas faith does. So I want to say the kind of vision you've got there, we've somehow got to try to get that to people, to make it as real in their minds as it can be in ours, and to say, would you like that kind of future? You know, we have to, we know that the right will bury all of their differences because they're interested in power, and they'll work with people they hate. The left will not do that. The left will constantly split and fissure and splinter because of slight, tiny little differences. We've got to stop doing that. We really haven't got time for that.
Laura, I think you wanted to jump in.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that Geordies are quite good at interrupting as well. We do quite like that.
Shout
in
out
fact,
Geordies.
we should just speak over each other, and it'll be like. But I was going to say that hope also, I think, must be earned. I've done this. I've been part of a political project. Mind you, we thought we were on the precipice of government as well, so I felt like it was quite a hopeful time, and with all of the limitations of what could have been done. But I think what I mean by hope needs to be earned is that quite often, because people are so desperate for hope, myself included, I'm not saying I'm any different, is that we look for what can we do now, what's going to save us, who's going to save us, where we're going to put our trust in. And it becomes this, as I said, a reductive, sloganeering, saviourist kind of politics. And I think that's a shortcut. And I think that that leads to false hope. And I think that leads to this sense of betrayal when our leaders aren't necessarily perfect people, or, you know, the projects fail, because we're going to have to do a lot of failing and a lot of trying. And I think what I mean by hope needs to be earned is that we need to have a plan which is about collective power, and I'll repeat it again, not that deferential power that we will hand it over to someone who will be good for us. We will build it ourselves.
One thing that, sorry.
No, please.
I started a little charity recently, it's a little foundation, and I give money to things that I think are good. And usually it's to individuals who are doing something and who would otherwise have to take a job and couldn't do that thing any longer. And one of the things I've discovered since starting that is that there are so many community groups all over this country that you never hear anything about, who are building things, really good things. Just to give you one example, there's a place called Coleville, very unpromising name. But some people there took over a few abandoned buildings and started building a community centre for kids, places where people could meet up and do things. They did it on really no money at all. But this place has completely revitalised. This small town has become a different town, you know. And I've seen it in Yarmouth, where we've helped some people, in lots and lots of places. So it's all going on and it's all there, but nobody gets to hear about it. Again, you know, this is a perception thing. If we started hearing these stories, I'm sure there would be many, many other instances. And it gives encouragement when you hear that other people can do this. You think, oh, maybe we could do that as well.
I could talk about this all night, but unfortunately there are time limitations. Yanis, I wanted to maybe guide things back in a different direction a little bit with you.
Sorry, that was me.
That was you? Brian. One of the things you did mention, this I did hear you say in your introduction, was that story from the launch of Diem in Berlin. The guy with the picking up the pieces, Mr.
Yes.
Heinz. Do you think...
The pessimistic, faithful.
The guy without the... Well, do you think he was right at the time? Were we, like, doomed? Was it predestined for 2026 to happen? Or were there missed opportunities in the last 10 years? Were there chances we had to change things in a different direction?
With the benefit of hindsight, now I can see that he was absolutely, utterly right. What we had embarked upon 10 years...
Just wasted 10 years of our lives.
Was always going to crash onto the shoals of exorbitant power. And not only exorbitant power in the form of, you know, oligarchs and capitalists and governments and, you know, intelligence services, but also the center-left that was always going to try to absorb our energy and crush us if we ever jeopardize the great privileges, the exorbitant power of the very powerful. That's how the center-left works, whether it is the Social Democratic Party in Germany or the Labour Party here. You can see in the end it reverts to the mean, which is, you know, if we are going to put it in the context of the 18th century, 17th century, there were always people who were critical of the savagery with which the masters treated the servants, but they were not against slavery. That's the Social Democrats for you. You know, that's the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. He wants, you know, his cake and he wants to eat it, and in the end he's going to be a ludicrous figure in British history, political history. So in that sense, we were doomed. But I do believe that history's wheel turns in the right direction, not only by our victories, but also by our righteous defeats. I think defeats are crucial because every time you build a movement like ours, you train people to think that the impossible is possible. And, at some point, it's going to become possible.
Yeah.
I mean, how long did workers need to struggle for the first trades union to win the first strike? I mean, weren't they doomed to the first strikes? Yes, they were doomed. Wasn't the attempt to end slavery doomed? I mean, think of Spartacus. It was, 2,000 years ago. It was doomed, but Spartacus's defeat, it was much better than Spartacus being a good slave to a master. So, we are refusing to jeopardize our soul, and we continue to exist through resisting.
Please, Brent.
The other thing I think is important is your effort, even if it fails, plants a seed in other people who haven't tried anything yet. In the sort of late 80s, when I first started playing around with computers and the internet started appearing, there was such a mood of kind of irrational idealism about that. And a lot of people, me for a while among them, was saying, oh, we don't need politics anymore. We don't do politics. Politics was sort of uncool because technology was going to make it all irrelevant. What we needed was management, not politics. So it was an idea that ideology would evaporate. And of course, that meant that a lot of the most interesting minds weren't in politics. It left a huge vacuum, which was filled by very much less interesting minds, and I think became the seed bed for the fascism that we see now. There was a vacuum. I used to say, laissez-faire is fine, but well, you're laissaying, somebody else is fairing.
That's right. Just a quick point on this, if I may, Laura. When you started and I started playing around with the internet, we did so even before it was called the internet. In my case, it was called JANET, Joint Academic Network in universities. You see, the reason why there was so much hope about the original internet was because it wasn't capitalist.
Yeah.
It was a genuine digital commons. It didn't belong to anyone. There were no companies. Nobody bought or sold anything on it. It was a genuine social gift exchange. We would produce stuff, we would give it away on the internet to everyone, everybody would reciprocate. So it was an experiment in socialism until it was privatized.
Yeah.
So you see, the left was always right. It doesn't matter who thinks what. What matters is who owns what.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Always right and always losing, though. So,
because 0.001% own the most powerful bits of machinery in the world, and we need to take it away from them, and we need to socialize.
Unfortunately, I need to start wrapping this panel up. We promised these good people some lessons. Having spoken about the past 10 years, our experiences, what they taught us, and looking forward at the next 10 years that lie ahead, what do you think, this is for all of you, is the one mistake we cannot afford to make this time around? Or the one thing we absolutely need to get right? Who'd like to go first?
Well, I had a very obvious realization the other day. I'm sure everybody in this room has already had this realization, but I was thinking about this new war in Iran, and I thought that war is being fought about fossil fuels. Nearly all these wars have been fought about fossil fuels. And I suddenly thought, so stopping war is actually contingent upon us stopping our dependency on fossil fuels. But the take-home from this was, I'm president of this thing called Stop the War Coalition, and I have a little charity of my own called Earth Percent. I just thought, well, these are both the same fucking thing. Why don't we all realize that? Why don't these two huge movements, because they're both very big movements, you know, the environmental movement and the movement for ending wars and pacifism, they're huge numbers of people. Why don't we realize that we're doing the same thing? That would be very powerful.
I think the main lesson that I have taken forward and learned from the last 10 years is that class struggle is absolutely pivotal to every single thing that we do from now on. That we are not in some kind of, I know people would love to think we are, and not us, but we're not in some kind of post-class world. Some of my heroes are the people who engaged in the 84-85 strike and withdrew their labour and were absolutely crucified by Margaret Thatcher and the police and the state, and those women who also fed the communities throughout the strike. Their aims were met. They made sure that those communities did not starve, and they are absolutely heroic women. Now, the attack on working class communities is as intense now as it was then.
Yeah.
The way in which our class is being crucified by successive governments, by neoliberal capitalism, punished, incarcerated, exploited, the violence that is endemic at the heart of this system, that we do not put working class emancipation at the core of every single element of our political activity, and not just that, that working class people should be the drivers of that political project, would be and repeat every single mistake that has happened on the British left since this last 40 years of decline. And I'll just finish by saying this, is that I don't want to be an activist. I've made a lifelong commitment of being an activist, right? I don't want to call myself that. No. I bet nobody here does. I'm sick of going into spaces and places where me neighbours aren't there, or my family isn't there, and it's like, oh, all these activists, all these special people doing things. Actually, this has to be a mass movement that is about involving absolutely everybody with all of the brilliant skills and talents that our class has. Because I think whilst we have potentially been doomed to defeat before, all of the lessons of those defeats are gifts, and we've got them. We've got the gifts at our disposal, the wisdom of what those defeats have taught us. And for me, it's that working class emancipation with working class people driving the next political project is key.
Well, I'll just add a few words on what Laura has already said. And I'm going to be very brutally honest with you and extremely rude about the Labour Party. Because the Labour Party is the only political party in Britain today that does not believe in class struggle. The Tories and Reform are all about class struggle. They are fighting for the opposite class. So the Labour Party needs to be ditched once and for all. I'm not going to say what you should be voting for or who you should join, but later on we have both Zack Polanski and Jeremy Corbyn here. And this is the mass movement that we need.
It's exactly what I was it's the two poles that I was talking about just now. You're right.
Yeah.
We'll bring them together on this stage.
That's what we're doing, but don't tell anyone.
Thank you for that segue, Yanis. Very smooth. Yeah. To the second part of this event, which will happen right after a 15-minute intermission, so you'll get to stretch your legs, grab a couple of drinks, but it's going to be strictly 15 minutes. If you still feel like there's any point to elections, stick around. And even if you have been disillusioned by this panel, give Jeremy and Zack the chance to persuade you. See you again in 15 minutes. Thank you, Yanis Varoufakis, Brian Eno, Laura Pidcock.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're back in your seats with a drink in your hands. We're about to start the second part of tonight's event, Resistance is Existence. To move us along, we're now moving into the second part. Please join me in welcoming to the stage poet, playwright, and performer Inua Ellams.
Hello. I'm too Nigerian for that, guys. Come on now. Hello. Thank you. So I'm the light entertainment. So I'm going to read some poems to you. One of my favorite Marvel superheroes is Captain America, who in the Civil War film, if you watch the comic, if you read the comics, not the film, was the one who picked up the shield against the American army, against the American establishment that was trying to essentially shepherd all the heroes into concentration camps. And he was killed on the steps of the Supreme Court. I've just ruined the comics for you, but it's really brilliant. So I've thought a lot about what it means then to believe in democracy and what it means to be a symbol of your country whilst fighting against it. And I've been obsessed with comic books ever since then. And this is me trying to be my very first superhero. Fuck Captain America, by the way. This is about trying to be Nigeria's first Superman. It's called Shame is the Cape I Wear. On the first day of holidays, my mother leaves a dark blue wrapper on her bed, her polished boots in one corner, and in no time I assemble a superhero costume to defend our house against the plague of lizards and their spindly children. Tongues flicking, head nodding on the afternoon heat, they are a reptilian evil. Every hero needs a nemesis. And this cotton cape casts me as Nigeria's first Superman, and they threaten life in the Lagos metropolis. No matter the property you buy, how tight shut the gutters, how climb-proof the walls, also how sharp their crown of barbed wires, the lizards come. Father who insists the clean, well-swept backyard helps is away, and the long-tailed legion are confidently swarming about the place, across air vents, up the garden's wire mesh, too thin to survive their claws. Anyway, I'm hovering by that mesh, a rubber band spread with my fingers, cape flowing, and a quiver of toothpick-thick bristles, one curled against the taut elastic. I catch a lizard's beady, steady eyes, take aim, fire, and watch the bristle break through its back, first piercing its soft stomach, and my aim just gets better. An hour and their bodies piled. Above, a commotion of flies excitable over the stiffening flesh and blood, and I've watched my shadow lengthen to cover the gray and red-head corpses, the backyard a silent killing field, and I could almost feel that flowing cape deflate. Sometimes I think that little boy in his mother's work boots has followed me my whole life through. There he is when I'm laughing at a party and find a crimson drink spilled across the clean carpet. When I look in the mirror to see what the years have done to me. And when I flick through news channels and catch a wartime resident speak of collateral damage and first-class weapons, and the locals are broken behind soldiers and men in tweed who fabricate stories of jubilant cheers and fist pumps, and shame is the cape I wear that day. Shame. And that little boy, that shadow is there, his head hanging down as it did back then, his hands shaking. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to read 3 more poems. If you don't like it, just count down. It'll be good. I know this is about European democracy, but I'm African. I have the pleasure of being an African who was colonized by Europe. I'm Nigerian and British. And a lot of what happened was in the wake of British violence. What happened in northern Nigeria, where I'm from, where Boko Haram is synonymous with extremism in northern Nigeria. And I think the poem I read before is sort of about the sadness of being part of a machine, being part of violence. And the question is how to resist violence and how to rage against it whilst being part of a machine, which is why we are here. Resistance is existence. And this poem is an attempt to try and understand Boko Haram, why they exist, and those who take advantage of these young boys. It's called Fuck Boko Haram. After the guns had danced to silence, the boy whose father was killed joined others, sipping cough syrup in the tight corners of the parched village, their eyes hollow and hungry for things their widowed mothers could not provide. There were never enough schools to teach the possible rift between thoughts and action. The boys would lash out, wild as scuffling dogs in the scavenging heat, which the men who killed their fathers took for killer instincts and came back masked in the Quran's floral lilt, promising their empty bellies fulfillment, their empty hands purpose, their empty lives love. These boys followed their lolling tongues into the desert, days and nights tottering past rattlesnakes and scorpions, as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had done, seeking his destiny in caves, where more stories of him were flattened like curved knives and slipped like drips of concrete into the broken parts of the breaking boys. And bit by bone by brick, they were built into the militia of black flags and fire, who return to the village now, guns, dancing, who speak into the silence over the fresh corpses to the new hungry and hollow-eyed boys, promising fulfillment, purpose, love, their mouths like gardens blooming in the desert bleak. Thank you. Thank you. 2 more poems, countdown. I also think a lot about the legacy of European colonial violence, which is what Boko Haram was about, is when the British invaded and brought Christianity and brought a governmental structure, which we now know doesn't work, which is why we are here, and enforced that in Nigeria, which created the violence. But we see this playing out in Gaza right now. My father is from Benin, which was invaded and destroyed in 1897. And part of the way violence was meted out among my ancestors is exactly how violence was meted out in Gaza. And this poem called To Work the Night is dedicated to the people of Gaza and Benin. Thank you. And after headlines called for blood, the old survivor rubbed his wound, and after financiers pledged their wealth, the beggar snapped her wooden spoon. And after factories forged the guns, the preachers warned bad seeds were sown. And after warships filled their sails, the waving bride walked home alone. And after soldiers disembarked, the dove's branch lost its peaceful leaves. And after commanders pointed there, the lookouts trembled in the trees. And after missiles struck the tents, the playful became journalists. And after allies turned their backs, the rebels raised their bloodied fists. And after tanks chewed up the soil, the farmer saw his harvests bleed. And after bullets swarmed like rain, the goat herd cried among the weeds. And after shrapnel cracked the skull, the doctor held both halves till dawn. And after cannons split the skin, the drummers slapped their chests like drums. And after snipers shot at kids, the midwife wailed to ease her shock. And after fighters flattened schools, the teachers taught among the rocks. And after settlers burned their books, the authors planted tales in songs. And after looters emptied stores, the craftsmen smiled, for all were flawed. And after pilots bombed studios, the actors turned their films to plays. And after soldiers bombed bakeries, the bakers made ovens from clay. And after generals quoted scripture, the faithful still knelt down to pray. And after evil worked the night, the good crawled out to claim the day. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. And when I get really disheartened by all of this, I tend to play with my nephews and nieces. And this poem is about the frustration of having these constant conversations and it leading nowhere, but still hoping, like Brian Eno said, looking for faith, because faith demands us to act as if we're walking into the future and it's already there. This is my last poem for the evening. My name is Inua Ellams. On the 26th, I'm doing a show at the South Bank Center called An Evening with an Immigrant. Please come. This is my last poem. It's called Fuck Humanity. Sorry. Fuck humanity, I want to bellow like a card-carrying champion of the nihilist society. Fuck all the ways even our most earnest, faithful, folded over, humbled, deep down considered attempt at amending our venomous ills undoes itself. Think almond milk and California wildfires. Nitrogen fertilizer and industrial food waste, factory emission limits and the trade in carbon offsets, free market and exploitation, voluntary work and white savior complex, vegan avocado diets and deforestation, phones to connect our lonely spirits and black bodies in coltan mines. Fuck every single attempt. Our best bet is to annihilate our vicious selves. I want to bellow as Ellie pushes her 3-year-old hand into the calloused cave of mine. Her fingers, frail as elderberry petals, flutter. She calls me down to the careful constellations blooming in the brown universe of her brimming eyes, and all I am folds over, humbled deep down, reconsidering attempts at amending her venomous ills, even if that undoes me. Thank you. Thank you.
And now, welcome Yanis Varoufakis back to the stage.
Who said that resistance can't be fun and poetry and poetic and beautiful? Because you see, some people say to me, don't you get tired of constantly failing politically? Constantly, going from one defeat to the next? You heard what we said before. I mean, history is written. You are remembered more by your defeats, your, righteous defeats, than by victories. But beyond that, over the last 10, 12, 13 years when I became involved in electoral politics and this kind of thing, outside university life, I was blessed with new friendships, remarkable people like, Inua, like Brian Eno, like, Laura, like, everybody that you saw before and some of the people you'll meet after this, but people who are not here with us as well. One of the people that I got to know recently, Francesca Albanese. And he confirmed not so much hope, you heard what Brian said before, but definitely faith. 2 days ago, Francesca at a very high cost to herself and to her family, published her latest report as the United Nations Special Rapporteur. Could you have imagined 10 years ago that a functionary of the United Nations would be in a situation where their bank account was frozen by our Western liberal democratic governments for doing her job as part of the United Nations machinery? It would have been unthinkable a few years ago. It is happening today. There is Nicolas Guillou. He's a judge of the French state who can't even book a hotel within France because he had the audacity as the French-appointed judge in the International Criminal Court to indict Benjamin Netanyahu. 3 days ago, Francesca published a remarkable new report on torture, systematic torture in the occupied territories across the Greater Palestine area by Israel. It is a report that you must all read. Let me just read just a paragraph from it. It talks about the custodial and non-custodial practices which meet the threshold for genocide under the Genocide Convention. It documents, this report, how torture has become integral to the domination of and punishment inflicted on men, women, and children, both through custodial abuse and through a relentless campaign of forced displacement, mass killings, deprivation, and destruction of all means of life to inflict long-term collective pain and suffering. A continuous, territorially pervasive regime of psychological terror is being imposed, designed to break bodies, deprive a people of their dignity, and force them from their land. This is not incidental violence. It is an architecture of settler colonialism built on a foundation of dehumanization and narrated by a policy of cruelty and collective torture. That is the summary of the report by Francesca Albanese. Now, she was meant to be here today via video link, but I have a message from her because, look, I'm not going to present you with a conspiracy theory, but somehow the Wi-Fi in her hotel failed. Anyway, you know, these things happen. These things happen, not so often to those who support genocide. She just sent us, she sent to DM25 this message, I'm reading it to you. Friends, I tried to be with you, but technology was not on our side tonight. Do not doubt even for a minute about the strength you bring into this world by standing where I stand, making the sacrifices you are making, and prepare to do more and to give more. This time of rapture requires vision, sacrifice, and solidarity, and the imagination of the world we want to have after the moral disaster of this time. Stay strong, stay caring, and stay committed. Together we can and we shall. Francesca Albanese. To complete what I consider to be a splendid evening, that's my view, I think that what we are bringing onto this stage now is a trio that offer the possibility that hope will be made normal again for the many, not the few. I want you to welcome on stage Zack Polanski, the leader of the Greens.
I'm taking this for you, remember?
A gentleman going by the name of Jeremy Corbyn. Comrade Jeremy. Hi. I have to tell you that Jeremy has just come from Cuba. Jeremy has just come from Cuba. He's very sick. He should be in bed, but he chose to be with us tonight, and we thank him doubly for that. last but definitely not least, DiEM25's own Grace Blakeley, author, podcaster, economist, extraordinary personality, and beyond that, I think she's the perfect companion for these two because she's a Corbynista who happens to be a paid-up member of the Green Party. Grace Blakeley.
Great intro.
Okay, let's begin with Zack. Zack, we are here because we do truly believe, and by the way, this is a slogan that we copied from the good people of Gaza. I was told that right at the beginning of this latest spate of the genocide. Genocide has been ongoing now for a very long time, as we all know. And when I was inquiring into how some people that I was talking to in Gaza, how were they doing, how they were coping, and they said, well, for us, resistance is existence. So we plagiarized this. So, Zack, how do we resist?
I think we resist in lots of ways. One way of resisting is on a Tuesday night, coming to a theatre when you could be doing anything else to be in these conversations. I think resisting, though, is also for everyone in this audience and us up on the panel to think about who's not in this room, who would never dream of being in this room because they feel like it's not for them or politics isn't for them. I think resistance is making things more accessible, more inclusive, making sure we're talking to friends, family, even strangers sometimes. That's a difficult concept sometimes in London, but we can talk to strangers. I think resistance is joy, it's art, it's culture. And I think resistance is seeing exactly what's happening in this country where 50 of the wealthiest families own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population. That's 50 families and 34 million people. I think resistance is the common sense to say, that's not right, that's a political choice. Let's make different political choices.
To break the linearity, I'm going to go straight to Grace. Grace, apart from surfing in Cornwall, how do we resist? She's a surfer,
that is a form of resistance. I'm going to give what I consider to be a pretty old, and in some senses generic answer. Resistance is class war, really. It's class conflict, it's class struggle. And before any secret Daily Mail hacks in the audience say that I'm fomenting class conflict, it is worth bearing in mind that we already exist in a state of class war, but the ruling class is currently winning. So our question as socialists is how we win that class war, how we effect an irreversible shift of wealth and power in favor of working people, how we tip the scales away from capital and towards labor, how we take power back from the people who own and control all of our most important resources and really just pull that power back down into the hands of working people. And, I think today potentially we're going to be talking a lot about elections. Elections are very important. As you said, Yanis, both of you guys have been very formative in my own political journey. You're both focused on party politics. But I think it's also important to bear in mind that, the goal of socialism, this idea of affecting this irreversible shift of wealth and power in favor of working people, elections are just the start. As we were hearing in that last panel, they'll try and take you down before you win. And then if you do win, they're going to try and take you down from within the state. Just getting state power doesn't give you access to those levers that are going to allow you to affect those big shifts even within politics itself, let alone within the wider economy. So yeah, it's really just building class power and trying to make the people at the top, particularly our political class, trying to make them as scared of us as they are of the people writing the checks.
Jeremy, you've been resisting all your life, successfully, because the hardest thing to resist is the lure of power when it is offered to you in exchange for your soul. And Jeremy is a leading light in how to resist that power. But circling back to Gaza, where this slogan was plagiarized from. I know that you are holding the report by Francesca Albanese. Would you like to speak about that and the arms trade and the manner in which genocide is being weaponized?
First of all, Yanis, thanks very much for hosting us this evening and for this wonderful event. And thank you all for being here, because you don't have to go out on a Tuesday night to the Troxy. There's possibly something else on in London, I don't know. But you have, and that's the whole point. And so when people talk to me about the struggle's over, it's the end of history, there's no such thing as class struggle, it happens all day, every day in life, in different forms the whole time. And I come on to Gaza, and socialism is actually not just about electoral politics, it's about attitudes, life, how you treat people individually, and how communities work together with each other. Without realizing it, they're actually often very socialist communities doing that. We need to make sure that's understood. Now, the point I want to make about the war is, I'm beyond disgusted at everything I read and see about Gaza, about the West Bank, about Lebanon, about Iran, and so on. And the only people that are really winning in this war are the arms trade, the arms industry, and the arms dealers. And the money they've made is phenomenal. Trace the share prices of all of them, Raytheon, the whole lot of them, ever since October 23, and you'll see going like that. There's huge profits being made, and videos are being used of drone attacks in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, and so on, as a way of saying how effective these particular weapons are, and then more are sold. And last year, the world spent $2.4 trillion on arms. All of that is public spending, every bit of it. That's all money spent not on health, not on housing, not on environmental improvements or anything. I'm appalled at the British government, so we set up, through the Peace and Justice Project, the Gaza Tribunal. And we set that up because I produced a bill in Parliament saying that there should be an official inquiry into Britain's involvement in the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. And I produced it as a bill under the 10-minute rule procedure. It got past that stage. It was then blocked thereafter. I was expecting it. Broadly speaking, it was a sort of Chilcot-style public inquiry, but maybe with a bit more bite into the security apparatus that organized the overflying of Gaza to give information to Israel, in the supply of weapons, in the use of factories in Britain to manufacture those weapons, and so on. And also the reality of the genocide, which they actually denied. So we had a two-day tribunal, 29 expert witnesses from all kinds of walks, medical, legal, people from Gaza, people from the West Bank, Francesca Albanese, Mustafa Barghouti, a whole lot of people. And we produced the Gaza Tribunal, which is an inquiry into Britain's role in Israeli war crimes in Gaza. And this, to me, is utterly devastating, because Britain has knowingly and deliberately involved itself in wholly illegal, in any terms, bombardment of Gaza, and the responsibility for the deaths of 71,000 people in Gaza, the mental health crisis that will be in Gaza for the next century and beyond because of what's happened, and the Nakba, the second Nakba that's coming as the Israeli forces will try to drive them out. And the British government knew all this all along. They refused to accept the argument that they were complicit in genocide. So the conclusion we come from is this. If the ICJ, International Court of Justice, has decided that acts of genocide are taking place, and this country knowingly occasioned and supplied weapons to Israel, knowing what they're going to be used for, that makes the British government complicit in genocide. And so when we produce this report, when we produced this report, the next day, I wrote 2 letters, one to the International Court of Justice and the other to the International Criminal Court, inviting them to interview Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper and David Lammy on charges of genocide against the Palestinian people. We've got to do everything. We've got to do everything we can. March, meet, demonstrate, leaflet, talk, rally, sing, boycott, all those things you've got to do, because that all helps. And now I'm sure you've all been on the Palestine marches. I've been on all of them. And when you get home, you think, what have I done? I've marched around London again. And then you talk to somebody in the West Bank, talk to somebody in Gaza, and they say thank you, because the fact you got 100,000 people or 200,000 on the streets of London gives us some hope that there is support for us somewhere. So carry on marching, carry on demonstrating, never give up on the Palestinian people.
Zack Polanski, you come out of a remarkable by-election result, which has given tremendous hope to people well beyond the shores of the United Kingdom, believe you me. Maybe you are not aware of that, but believe me, where I'm coming from, everybody stood up and said, oops, something is happening here. Can I ask you a simple question? What is your plan for winning government and changing everything?
I think this relates to the conversation you had in the first half, where I agreed with much of it. But I want to talk about the bit I disagree with, because it makes it a more interesting conversation. This idea of hope. And obviously, I talk about hope a lot. People tell me a lot that they're feeling hopeful. And that in of itself is really important, because Grace is entirely right. Elections are just the beginning, but also they're not even the beginning. The whole bit before elections, I think, is what's happening right now, which is people turning up to door knock, to leaflet, to go to a community centre, to do an act of solidarity, no matter what the form. That's what you do anyway when you've won elections, when you win a government, and then you change things. You create acts of solidarity in communities. So the first thing I would say is we don't have to all start being kind and loving and compassionate to each other after we've won an election. We can all do that now. And part of that is elections, but part of that is just being a human being in communities and looking out for each other. I think it's not enough just to be hopeful. If you're just hopeful without a plan, then you're just mouthing off. I think it's about having hope and a plan. I also disagreed, and it's good to be sat with Jeremy tonight, that left-wing policies aren't popular. Jeremy, was it 3 million more votes you got than Keir Starmer got? So that's a...
The highest vote this century for Labour
Right.
was 2017, yeah.
Right, and you know, I say that number 3 million because it's wedged in our brains as just a stat you give off, but that's 3 million people. That's not a small amount of people who wanted a politics in this country that was kind, compassionate, that wanted to move wealth away from private capital and back into our hands. It was something that wanted to nationalize our water services again, wanted to nationalize our public services, and that's very popular in this country. And I think what the right-wing media, and to be frank, the centrist media...
Don't forget broadband communism.
Quite.
It's actually very popular.
Yeah, and totally. And actually, broadband is a good example of where the media immediately jumped on, it's not possible, it's idealistic, it's not pragmatic. And that's their number one weapon, is to always make people think better isn't possible, that change isn't possible. And we know exactly why, because the multimillionaires and billionaires who pump the same money into wars, or into oil and gas, or into arms companies, or into gambling companies, are the same people who own those media organizations. Because once they've seized all the assets, and once they've bought up all the assets, what's the next thing they buy? They buy the media. And when they bought the media, they buy our democracy. And I guess we're here tonight saying they've taken our power, they've taken our democracy, they've taken our media, but collectively, we are going to take it back.
Woo!
Grace, you worked for Jeremy's Labour Party. You are part of Zack's Green Party. You have a very strong narrative about the importance of community organizing and movement building. You're part of the M25. What's your theory of change, not in the abstract, but in the very concrete of, you know, in the end, what really matters is getting our hands, your hands, on the levers of power, so you can stop the wars, you can introduce the wealth taxes, you can change, you know, corporate law, you can create cooperatives, you can move away from a voracious capitalist machinery that is eating up and, you know, spitting out humanity. What's your theory of change, of how to win government?
So I think it's important to talk about this in the abstract as well as in the concrete. And in concrete terms, I started thinking about this really having spent most of my 20s being involved in Corbyn's Labour Party, Jeremy's Labour Party, really believing that we were going to win and that when we won, we would change everything. And I remember having an interview with you not long after the election where you were like, on day one, I was going to end homelessness. And the pain and the grief that so many of us felt at knowing that that possibility was so close and then wasn't realized. I think it caused a lot of kind of fractiousness on the left for a long time after that, because there was a sense of despair. And a lot of us had to work through that despair, and we all did it in different ways. And I did go back to theory. I spent most of COVID rereading Marx and all of the other Marxist theorists and the long, incredible history of Marxist theory that we have in this country, which, you know, you are a part of because you were, you know, close with Tony Benn, who was close with Ralph Miliband, who was part of all of this like long Marxist tradition of theorizing how do you relate to the British state. And it's a really important and thorny question, and I think it's the only way for us to have a pragmatic attitude that doesn't make us flip between, you know, this person or this organization is going to save us all, and total despair when that fails. You have to have this pragmatic understanding of what the state is. And that theoretical tradition says the state is a social relation. It is not a tool that you pick up when you win an election and use to do things, right? It is not a neutral entity that's separate from the economy. It is something that's embedded within a broader set of social relations, within capitalist social relations. So when you have a society that's incredibly unequal and in which capital, i.e. the people who own all the stuff and control all of those resources, has all the power, they are able to organize within the state to get what they want. And you see this with the fossil fuel companies who are using this crisis to say, we need to start drilling for North Sea oil again. You see it with the banks organizing for, you know, the bailouts that they wanted after the financial crisis. You see it with the companies that demanded loans. You know, Greensill getting David Cameron to send off text messages to his mates in the Bank of England saying, give us a loan. They're very good at organizing within the state. They're very good at organizing outside of the state. And if we want to be able to win elections, use that power we were to get if we were to have elections, and then also shift the balance of power in society as a whole, then we have to be looking at that process of winning power holistically, which is shifting the balance of power in favor of the many, not the few. And that has loads of different elements. So political parties are one really critical plank, right? Community organizing, we've already mentioned, again, extremely important because that's where your power is rooted. When capital comes at you, you need to have that base in people's lives where you can say, this is what we've done, we've reopened your community center or whatever. The labor movement, Laura was talking about that, so important. If we're gonna shift the balance of power in society, we need to really focus on rebuilding worker power. People need to be able to say, if you don't give me a wage increase in line with inflation because of a war that's been caused by some maniac halfway around the world and that's enriching fossil fuel companies and defense companies, then I'm gonna go on strike and you're gonna have to deal with that. And all of these pillars are, all of these pillars need to come together. And I think as the left, we are all working in different ways to build this power. And for the first time in a really long time, I do see some hope that we might be able to come together and translate that into something that really scares the people at the top.
Jeremy, amongst all of us here, you're the one who were on the verge of stepping into 10 Downing Street, not as a visitor, but as a resident. Now we are where we are. What is your theory for accomplishing in the future that which didn't happen in 2017 in particular, and also in 2019? How do we do it now? How does the radical, progressive, eco-socialist left do it now?
I remember a few months after the 2017 election, I was on a demonstration, and it was raining, as it always does when there's a demonstration. And somebody said, "Oh, God, I wish you'd won the election." So I said,
you would probably be demonstrating against yourself.
So I said, "Yeah, so do I, but it would still be raining today." They said, "Well, maybe, but we wouldn't have to be on a demonstration, would we?" I said, "Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. That's where you're so wrong, my friend." He said, "Yeah, but you wouldn't be cutting child benefits. You wouldn't be criminalizing the homeless." I said, "No, listen to me. You'd have had to be at a demonstration defending us because of all the things we would be doing and all the attacks we would be under from the super rich, the ruling class, and industrial powers all over this country. So it would have had to have been a mobilization." And the point Grace made just now is actually a very, very fundamental and important one. Politics of the left usually, but not always, transformed into electoral politics, because clearly holding elected office at local authority, region, national, and so on is important and a very important thing to achieve and take forward. But just being elected to a council or a parliament doesn't necessarily mean you can achieve what you want to without some degree of mobilization around you, which is why I was very strongly opposed from the moment I was elected by the bureaucracy of the Labour Party, particularly. To be honest, I underestimated their skills and abilities in undermining people. I confess to that. Maybe that's my fault. There we go. And so I was very determined to turn the Labour Party into a community organising organisation, which would mean that the day-to-day politics of defending a school against closure, making sure some vacant land is turned into a park, making sure that Uber Eats riders are properly paid and unionized, all the kind of campaigns that need to be fought all the time were actually part and parcel of the day-to-day political operation of a political party, rather than getting on good suits and turning up at election time and promising the earth and not being able to do anything about it. It is about mobilizing people that is so important. And so the electoral road going forward has to be rooted in what goes on and is done in communities. Now, we're going into an electoral period now for local elections, certainly all over London and a lot of other parts of England, as well as elections in Scotland and Wales are going on. There are lots of competing forces there. In the sense, you've got the traditional parties, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem and so on. You've then got the more radical end of things. You've got the Greens, you've got our party supporting others, and you've got independent groups all over the country. In some cases, it's very unclear what's going to happen in each particular area. But I tell you what, it is a development of community-based, radical, demand-led politics, class-based, that is about the way working-class communities have been denied and destroyed, the way that the post-industrial world in much of the north of England and the Midlands has not been replaced with secure, permanent jobs. It's been replaced by part-time, insecure work and the loss of the whole sense of community. But also there's another question which we all have to grapple with as the left. We spend an awful lot of time thinking about what each other thinks about each other on social media in various sorts. And we suddenly believe that somehow the whole world is what's being said on social media. Can I say it very quietly? It isn't. It isn't. It's not just social media. And so there's a whole bunch of people probably 20% of the population never look at social media, not interested in it, don't even know what it is. They're people. They've got rights just the same as everybody else. You cannot ever underestimate the importance of being out there talking to and listening to people as the way you take things forward. I'll finish on this, I've gone too long otherwise. We did the Green New Deal paper, and I managed to get the climate emergency motion through Parliament in 2019, on May Day 2019. We did it because Michael Gove spoke at great length, telling the world how much he disliked me, how much he disagreed with me, and how wrong I was on everything, except he couldn't find any argument against me saying there was a climate emergency. So that's very kind of him. And so the thing went through Parliament, it was declared. And on the basis of that, we then set up green round tables around the country on how you transform your society into sustainability with protection of jobs and living standards and all that went with it. They were absolutely fascinating, randomly picking 200 or 300 people into a room in an afternoon. People had often never met each other before. Some worked in polluting industries, some were campaigners for environmental improvement, some were political activists and so on. And then saying to them, okay, how would you change Blackpool into being a sustainable town? It's not obvious, because it's a place that relies on car traffic, it relies on tourism, it's the poorest place in the country almost, and so on. Confronting people with those arguments, you realize the intelligence, the knowledge, the imagination, and the ability that's denied by so many, denigrated by the posh behavior of the media towards people with, as they would put it, funny accents, not coming from particular universities or schools. Mobilize the people's imagination and thought. That way, we've got the power to bring about real social change and real redistribution of wealth and power.
Zack, I want you to visualize the moment when you step into 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland.
I feel like you've got an agenda here.
Where people are, you know, they're banking on that, on you managing to do that. So what are the first 3 things you do? That's part A of my question. There's a part B. From experience, when I walked into the Finance Ministry of Greece, within a few days, the central bank shut down the ATMs of voters in an act of financial terrorism. Probably they won't go that far here, but they will do things that will damage the country and the people of Britain in order to stop you from doing those 3 things. So, what are these 3 things, and what are you going to do when the backlash starts?
Okay, so I want to answer your question directly. It's what I'm known for. But I'm going to look at Grace first of all, because she wrote an amazing, is it Substack? I'm not cool enough to know what it is. Substack. That was called No One's Coming to Save Us. And she talked about 2 men in particular, which were Zack Polanski and Jeremy Corbyn, so this is awkward.
God, sorry.
Accidentally.
And basically said, we've got to stop looking to politicians, and I don't want to speak for Jeremy.
Were we being blamed for it all, or what?
To looking to politicians to go, actually, when they're Prime Minister or when they're in power, everything's going to be okay. You know, we need to be doing that work now in our communities. And yes, there's absolutely a role for politics. It would be odd as a political leader for me to say politics doesn't matter, etc. I'm not saying that for a second. But I'm always slightly resistant to a question that everything's going to be okay once someone's in power.
Yeah, sure.
We need to save ourselves collectively. And what I mean by that is everything we're talking about, being in our communities, being in our trade unions, making sure whether it's in the workplace, in a faith place, a non-faith place, that we're having those conversations to build that community power. That being said, I will now answer your question.
Okay, the 3 things you do immediately.
Yeah, well, the first thing I don't think is sexy, but I think it's really important, which is we need to change the voting system in this country. Yeah. And I've been saying this for a long time, but what I love now is that before the press were able to go, that's just because you don't like first past the post. And you might have noticed a little, known constituency called Gorton and Denton, where Hannah Spencer took on the billionaire donors and the Green Party won, and that proves that either under first past the post, left-wing socialism, progressivism can win and will win.
Woo!
That being said, it's a totally broken voting system which results in the first week of a campaign with parties, and I hold my hands up, the Green Party do it too. You have to go, X, Y, and Z can't win here. It's between us and reform. And then that just debases the value of the democratic conversation. So changing the voting system would be one of the first things. A wealth tax would clearly be a day one thing, and a day one priority. Now, if there's, as Grace said, the Daily Mail hack, who I'm sure is in the audience somewhere, they're lurking.
Hands up.
Yeah.
Hands up.
They're very welcome. They're a citizen too, and they should probably, learn something or two tonight. But they would say, oh, it's only going to raise, 14, 15 billion pounds. That's not going to do things. Well, 15 pound will go a long, 15 pound, 50 billion. Just proved everything they say about me. 15 billion pound will go a long way. But also, more importantly, it's about tackling the inequality. It's about tackling the super wealth and the excess wealth that cannot continue. So wealth tax would clearly be very important. And then absolutely what Jeremy said he would have done on day one, which is end homelessness. It's absolutely outrageous that in a society that is the 6th wealthiest in the world, we have people sleeping outside on the streets tonight in cardboard homes. It is absolutely outrageous. It does not need to be that way. And you said, did you say 3? I'm going to put 3B.
No, I said 3, yeah.
But 3B is, we also need to end right to buy, we need to build social housing, and we need rent controls. It's going to be a busy first week.
Okay. I'm not going to let go on the last part, which is, what will you do when the sabotage begins? When the Bank of England, together with the Treasury, together with the City of London, start engineering a financial crisis, a crisis of liquidity, a crisis that makes even your own voters very worried about the next day.
I phoned Yanis
Varoufakis
and say, shit, what do I do?
Right?
Sorry.
I think you should answer that question yourself, actually. I think you should answer your own question.
Well, let me just make one comment on this, and maybe we can devote a whole other event like tonight to discuss about it, because this is important. Whoever, on behalf of the radical left, manages to win government, in whichever country, will have to have an answer to that. And I think that the idea is that we need to take away, socialize, the right of the bankers to print our currency and to monopolize our payments. That, if you take away the payment system, because this is what they are going to do, this is what they did with us. They effectively threatened the people that if they keep voting for radical policies against austerity and so on, they would deny them access to their own money. So a monetary commons is something I would like to advocate, but this is not the time to do it. We can do it another time. I think I'm going to pass the baton on to the second economist on this panel. Grace, how do you
I did a whole thing the other day saying I'm not an economist, I'm a Marxist.
But tsunami.
Yeah, so this was something I remember thinking about way back in 2017. And we, actually a bunch of us, ended up looking at things like how the French government under Mitterrand tried to push back against basically what was a process of capital flight and capital strike in an attempt to undermine that government. And that obviously came from the private sector, right? So capital flight being the billionaires are going to leave, capital strike being we're going to stop investing because you're, not creating the right incentives for us. Then there are also the institutions of state that are going to be wielded against you. So yes, the Bank of England, allegedly independent, but extremely close to a lot of vested interest within the finance sector. And then of course you have the bond markets, who have already punished one of our prime ministers so severely that she was outlasted by a lettuce. So there's a lot of stuff there, and it is challenging. And I'm not going to say that there's an easy fix to this, because there isn't. There are things that need to be done to try and limit capital strike and capital flight, things like considering limitations on capital inflows and outflows. I do think that's an option. Thinking about what the mandate of the Bank of England actually is, and making sure that it is accountable to people rather than just the finance sector. And there are also going to be difficult choices to be made about how to approach questions around public spending. And I think, Zack, you've trodden a really strong line there, which is to say, yes, you know, government spending needs to be sustainable, right? We've spent decades now wasting billions of taxpayers' money on war. You know, the US in Iran, what is it, like $2 billion a day? That would have been enough to fund so much, you know, infrastructure and healthcare and all that sort of stuff. We can't push the line that there are no limits on what we can do. But as long as it's sustainable, as long as we're investing in a livable future, doing things like investing in renewable energy so that we're not spending vast sums of money every time there's a new geopolitical conflict, every time that, you know, oil reserves are threatened, because we have that stable base in our own society. Investing for the long term and making that argument. You know, this is us borrowing money, yes, but borrowing to buy a house, to buy a business, to build an asset, to build the assets of our society that are going to allow us to have that growth over the long run. So it is a combination of, you know, saying some things that are gonna maybe ameliorate the impact on financial markets and also building that infrastructure to be able to make sure they can't really effectively make those threats again in future.
Yeah, and just all I'd add to that is, so I met last week with Joseph Stiglitz, and we were talking about the difference between borrowing to invest and borrowing to consume. And we need political education in this country for a start, the media more than anything, because they constantly bring up these metaphors of a household economy being like a national budget. We need to break that down. And then the second is a little bit more technical, but if you bear with me on a Tuesday night at the Troxy, but it's these fiscal rules idea, you know, and to see Rachel Reeves do everything to please the market, and the irony being the market absolutely hates her and the Labour government anyway, so it's not worked. But the Office of Budget Responsibility, having been set up to reduce the debt, eliminate the deficit, you know, after years and years of the Office of Budget Responsibility, it clearly hasn't worked. So we need to look at something like an Office of Fiscal Transparency, which is something the New Economics Foundation are putting forward, which is saying rather than 3 people of the Office of Budget Responsibility who no one really knows who they are, they're unelected, making these decisions that Rachel Reeves is then stuck, or whoever the Chancellor is. Rachel Reeves wouldn't be my Chancellor, just in case if you're wondering. Just to clear that up. You know, in these kind of narrow frameworks, but actually going, what does it look like when we invest? And then I think when we get to the markets, recognizing the markets aren't ideological, and actually if you have put forward a plan that they can invest in, being able to take them with you to a point, obviously not allowing them to drag you along with them, were the elected people, not the markets, and I think it's important to point that out. But I think it comes back to hope and a plan, and actually spelling out that plan, along with better fiscal transparency and accountability. And then the final thing I'd say, and this is very relevant to what's happening in Iran right now, is, you know, Keir Starmer, in fact, you said this on Newsnight last night, like the media are making out like he's had this Love Actually moment. Well, in Love Actually, he didn't challenge the president and then, you know, buckle just a few days later. And what we've seen is a deeply unpopular and illegal war. It's Trump and Netanyahu's war, and it's causing this energy spike in our country. And then we have Rachel Reeves refusing to actually take any action right now for the long-term investment. And the Committee on Climate Change came out with a report last week that said decarbonizing by 2050 would be cheaper than just one oil shock. And so the fact we just allow these long-term problems to keep coming is exactly what's causing some of the problems in the markets as well, as opposed to going, here is a plan to reduce people's bills, to protect us, to tackle the climate crisis. And I think that's probably something the markets can eventually get behind.
Jeremy, and you close the
question
proceedings tonight because we have to respect labor rights and we need to be out in the next few minutes on behalf of the workers here. So you close the proceedings tonight.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for doing this evening. Could I just make this point about the economic issues? We need a government that would be assertive on what it was trying to achieve, assertive in trying to deal with the needs of housing, for example, environment, for example, and so on. And not allowing undemocratic forces like the OBR, like the Bank of England, to decide what your policies are. The OBR was set up to take decisions away from ministers and give them an excuse for not doing something. And that's how often these so-called advisory groups actually work on. And then get to what is the crying need here in London. everybody knows the crying need is what? Housing. Either, well, there's a number of things. One is obviously, as Zack said earlier, control of the private rented sector and the rent levels, which are obscene in London. Secondly, building of council housing. But the mayor has decided that from now on, he will make only a 20% requirement of social housing on any new housing development in London. That's absurd at any level. And when challenged about this, they say, well, the construction industry are not prepared to build things if they're going to be forced to build 100% social housing. Sorry, hang on a minute. Let's get this straight. We are expected to pay for it by giving them planning permission to make zillions of money out of any particular site, knowing full well what you're building will exacerbate, not diminish, the housing crisis in London. We need something a bit more determined where we simply say, you will build 100% council housing in order to deal with the housing crisis that millions of people are facing at the present time. And so it does move you into, to some extent, command and control economy. Now, I think, I choose my words quite carefully here, but you do have to have a government that's simply prepared to say, the resources will be made available to deal with the social crisis we're facing. Now, the 1945 Labour government had its enormous faults on international policies, and that maybe is a time for another day. But what it was good at was the social justice issues that faced the society at that time in health, in housing, in education, and in social services. It did all that very well. So what we need is the left coming together on policies. Stop arguing about personalities. Stop arguing about what happened in the past or didn't happen in the past. Come together on crucial social justice, peace and environmental sustainable policies, and we can win by mobilizing people to achieve all of that. Now, I've got a very special duty now. I've been appointed to do this by my comrades on the panel. Zack, speak up and shout out, happy birthday, Yanis Varoufakis. Grace very kindly hit it, and this is a wonderful present, Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano.
Thank you. Thank you, mate.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
I have another idea.
Happy birthday, dear Yanis. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Viva el socialismo!
Well, this has been the best birthday party ever. But if these people want to give us all a birthday party, would it not be wonderful if they joined forces? I think that this is a demand by everyone here. Thank you. So, let's have it for Grace Blakeley, Jeremy Corbyn, and Zack Polanski. And don't go away, there is a video.
Wait, guys.
There is a 1-minute video, and we are going to see you at the bar.
Life survives because it resists force. Every living thing endures by pushing against what threatens to erase it. In nature, resistance is not irresponsible. It's the foundation of survival. But in our societies, we're told a very different story. Submit, assimilate, accept. We're told that inequality is the way of the world. We're told not to resist, because a society that stops resisting can be manipulated, rearranged, and controlled. When people resist, a great change takes place. We become impossible to control, to silence, to ignore. That's why systems built on exploitation fear resistance above all else. Because resistance is not just opposition, but confirmation that alternatives exist. Everywhere, all the time. So when we resist the rich, when we challenge power, when we reject war, we're not acting irrationally. We're doing what living systems have always done. Because for all life on Earth, the same principle holds. Resistance is existence.